Here we are at the end of a decade and at the start of a new one. So we felt like it was a perfect time at Rethink Retail to interview leading retailers in the space on the trends that will impact the customer of tomorrow. Joining me today is Frederick LeCoq. Fred is the Chief Marketing Officer of Sporting Life Group with retail banners Golf Town and Sporting Life. Fred, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
His previous roles were with huge brands such as Nokia, LG, Microsoft, and the list goes on. So you have decades of experience in this space. Looking back, as we think about the past just 10 years even, there's been so much change in retail. What were some of the biggest challenges and hurdles that you think retailers faced?
Retail has been very disrupted over the past 10 years. I mean, I kind of bucket the disruption into 5 major streams that every retailer have to deal with, experience for sure, and had to find some solutions. I mean, if you look at retail in the past, lots of banner grew up as what I call specialty retailers, and if you look the one that are being hurt most, a big chunk of them is coming from the specialty world. And it's been a tough day. I mean, Golf Town's part of the Golfsmith was bankrupt in 2016. So we've been on a 3 years turnaround project that is so far, and knock on wood, pretty successful. But it's been a tough day for specialty retailer, and the reason for it, I think, is as part of the retail expansion, we kind of traded down the experience. We forgot to invest on customer experience, and we felt like the assortment, the specialty assortment, was doing the job for us. So I think that's one big trend. If you're a specialty retailer, you definitely need to reinvent, tear down, and redesign your customer experience, and that's one big trend that we're seeing. I think as speaking of that disruption, another one that's been tough to deal with, it's competition being one click away. In the past, when you were in my store, you were captive. Well, today we got those wonderful little toy called mobile, and literally through that device, my competition is actually able to stay connected with my customers in my, formerly we call my environment. And competition being one click away is another retail disruption that we got to deal with. A third one that we could, that we need to consider, the business model of retail that was always, I buy from vendors and I resell to my customers. Well, now the problem is vendors are going direct. So with customers that are willing to get connected directly with brands, that create a new channel competition that we were not familiar with. So a fourth one, it's the that brand new form of retail, whether you call it the pure player or the marketplace, that's been disrupting us a lot. And actually, I think it's a great opportunity because, speaking of the first point where I'm saying it's critical to invest into experience because experience creates value, I think those marketplaces should push us to recreate that differentiation factor that actually lies on experience. And lastly, from a still retail disruption perspective, owning the last 15 kilometers, the last 15 minutes, what I call that community proxy, it's got to be close to me, revolution. How do you own that last 15 to 20 minutes or 20 kilometers, or it's the last segment to your customers. And there's a big battle right now that's happening. What's interesting as well is mass retail became depersonalized retail. And I think now we're all trying to recreate that community retail, that, pop and mom shop. Mass personalized retail is not an oxymoron.
Right.
It can't happen, and it should happen. And I think that's part of the whole retail revitalization project.
Absolutely. So some great points you made about vendors becoming somewhat of a competitor, so some channel competition. You mentioned marketplaces, and then everything coming back to the foundation of that experience where specialty retailers really can excel. So looking into the future, and you said it's a good thing in some ways, right? All these changes are pushing retailers to make changes. What kind of changes do you think will be coming in the next 5 to 10 years? What trends will retailers be focusing on?
Well, as I say, like, the key to success is really doubling down on the experience. From a retail perspective, I think there's some major insight that we need to look at. We created a monster that was depersonalized retail, and I think we need to rebuild that customer connection, customer trust, and people want to know. And I think one opportunity here in the future is around transparency and traceability. And I'll take an example for everybody's talking about grocery and e-com, e-com and grocery. Well, when you're buying a grocery online, let's not talk about like grocery like the cookies and stuff like that, but let's talk about food, and everything that has to be fresh.
Right, the
Like,
fresh produce.
how do you deal with the cold chain? How do you ensure that the product that you bought, that's in a box, that's being delivered to you, has been maintained at a good temperature? And I think that. So I'm always watching. I can't help it. My home country, and look what retailers are doing out there. But if you're able through whatever app or whatever to track your delivery and the temperature of your order from the time it leaves the store until it gets to your house, that builds customer connection. That builds trust. And I think that's one of the things that is a great opportunity, once again, to rebuild that stickiness. Retail is more than convenience, and it's got to be more than convenience. So I think that's one piece here around that transparency and that traceability. Another trend that I see from retailer, we're all sitting on terabytes of data, like millions of terabytes of data, and we don't do anything with it. It's sitting somewhere. But in many cases, by the way, the guy who's sitting on top of the data is different from the guy that's supposed to activate the data, and there's very little connection. I think through data, and once again around what I call data and all the modeling that can come from AI. And being cool and not creepy, there's a fine line here around like data activation.
Line, yeah.
A third trend that I would say we need to deal with as well, on the when it comes to the future of retail, is all the new business model. And retail has been very linear. I buy a product from A, I store the product, I warehouse the product. I source, I warehouse, I display and merchandise, I sell, very linear. The resale market is huge. There's some very high-end reseller consignment store. You can go and buy some, probably product I wouldn't be able to buy, or and they're accessible. They're here. They're in good condition. And when you look at that new kind of economy, I think as a retailer, you need to ask yourself, what role am I going to play in there? It's well on its way in the apparel clothing world. IKEA has been starting to do this on the furniture world, but I'm like, is there any legacy retailer in today's world when it comes to re-commerce? who's the IKEA of e-commerce in different industry. And I'm like, that's another opportunity that we're having there. And it's a brand new business model. I'll give you another example, talking about all the different new business model that exist and then we need to look at. If you're a grocery retailer, it's always been the same way. I got my product, I do my flyer with my massive reach and hope people will come to my store. Okay, let's park that for a second and let's say you want to cook something tonight and you're going to go to a recipe website and you're going to say, you know what, hey, I'd like to cook something tonight, and you're being inspired because you want to cook some fish. Well, maybe you're going to end up browsing that site with a great fish recipe. And what's the number one question when you saw the recipe and you're like, oh, I'm inspired by that thing, I want to do it. Then, do I have the ingredients?
Oh,
then,
no.
Oh, no. All right. And you're going to look for another one. But what if, at that level, you were able just to click a button because that recipe website is connected in the back end with a retailer and just say, you know what? All the ingredients that you want for your meal tonight are being delivered at your house within 2 or 3 hours. So it's click and all the ingredients are being, delivered to your house. So when you come home at night and you got your friends coming over, all the recipes are here and you can actually cook. So you shop not by your list. You shop by a recipe. It means just from a retail perspective, say, hey, you know what? This is not traditional retail. We're not talking about advertising a flyer to customers so they can buy their weekly same list. We're trying to inspire our customers through a recipe or through something else. And then we make it easy for them. One click, being delivered. So all these kinds of new business, whether it's re-commerce, resale, whether it's what I would call anywhere commerce. Anywhere there's a content connection.
It's so true. And what you said about owning that last 15 mile or 15 kilometers, wherever you're from, that ties in to what you're saying about owning new business models. If you're going to dive into that, you really need to figure out that portion as well.
In France, we had an expression in the past for the grocery store. It used to be called, it's interesting, by the way, we called it familistère. What is familistère? It sounds like family store, isn't that? Because it was the store of the family.
Okay.
It was the store of the family. So that was a banner in France called Familistère. And I remember my grandmother saying all the time, I'm going to the Familistère. And the Familistère was that, small size. It wasn't like 60,000 square feet.
No.
It was that, like big enough store to have everything she needed, but not too big so it wasn't, like from a grocery perspective, overwhelming. And she was going there. And then as her kids grow, my mom actually was going there. So it became kind of the family store. And we would never thought of going anywhere else because that was part of our community. And I think through data, through experience, through also people, the people you have in your store, I think those are critical in terms of differentiating yourself. That's building that emotional connection, that stickiness, that store stickiness.
Absolutely.
Something that makes you come back.
Going to the family store. The store of today has changed a bit, and are we in some ways coming back to where it used to be, where retailers are looking, okay, we really need to incorporate community?
Yeah, I think we're coming back. We're coming back because we just realized that, like mass retail, just like, by the way, mass broadcast. Everything that has been mass has been depersonalized.
Diluted, yeah.
And we're kind of forcing, and I think people want something that's relevant. People want something that's personal. And I think we have to reinvent this. And I always take the example in retail. It's what we need to do is build a home of something. Not a house, or should I say a warehouse of something, but a home of something. And think about that. What's the difference between a house and a home? You flip a house, but you're homesick. How's that? But and what makes a house a home? And I think, I don't care flipping a house, meaning I'm not loyal to that place. I'm flipping my retailer, but if my home retailer, my family store was going to go away, I would miss him. I would be homesick. And I think the difference between a house and a home, it's about the people. It's about the conversation. It's about, the hard work, what's on the wall.
How you feel when you're there.
How you feel when you're there. I mean, a home is a destination. It's not a place. It's not staged. It's authentic. I usually, whether it's during Thanksgiving or family days, people are taking their car to go home. And they're going to fight 2 hours traffic, 3 hours traffic, like airport that are jammed. Why? The need to go home. And I think if as a retailer you're able to leverage all the technology that we have today that we may didn't have 20 or 30 years ago, and you put it to serve that home building versus like just a house real estate program, then you're going to be winning. And that's the thing we're pushing. We want to become the home of golf in Canada. And ask yourself, what does it take? We don't want to be the warehouse of golf, because being a warehouse of, Amazon can do it better than we do. But I don't want to be a warehouse. A warehouse is cold.
Yes, definitely. And for specialty retail, it seems like that might be the competitive advantage, is creating that environment where people just come to speak with the associates, look at the new products, and
going back into retail, look at another industry, which for me is fascinating. It's the video game industry. And on one hand, you had the music industry where all the record store has been hurt, and they went down pretty quickly. They were specialty store, music specialty store, by the way. And if you look at the kind of content they distribute, I would say it's the same, like the video game and music. It's entertainment. But the video game store are still alive. Why? There's a reason for this. Because when you go to a video game store, you're probably going to connect with a game addict. So somebody who shares your passion.
yes.
The person you're going to connect with is probably going to say, hey, you play that game? You should play that one. This one is really cool. I played it. You're probably going to bump into same kids. You're right. Just going to say, hey, you know what? Did you see that tips and tricks, at that level? Oh, so there's a bunch of things that you're getting from that visit that's beyond price. It's all those soft benefits. And it's that connection on your passion. And I think, it would be easy to buy a video game online. I'm not saying they don't, but there's still people going.
Yeah, you can just download it, right? You don't even have to go to the store.
But there's still people going in shopping mall to discuss with the video game. And same in the music industry. They're the guys that actually did it right, that were very passionate about what they were doing, that were connecting with you on an emotional level around your music style, etc., then they're still in business. So once again, the minute you take away that passion, that experience, that conversation, the world has mass equal dictation. Personalized equal conversation. So we're shifting. If retail is shifting from dictation to conversation, that's a new way of doing business. And customer loves it.
It's a whole way of looking at the business, right? And for the video game example you gave, I know U.S. retailer Five Below partnered with a video game esports stadium company to start opening communities attached to their stores, where they can come play games. So it's, like you said, thriving on the community and the emotional connection.
That's what it is. I think it's, we all have our community team, sports team. We all have, we want to be part of it. We want to be, and community for some time has been a bit fluffy. Everybody say, I need to do something in community. And people struggle to define what was community standing for. But I think the minute you spend time really defining who your community is. Your community could be, it doesn't have to be people that are very close to your store. There'd be a golfing community, it could be a running community, it can be something else, but define what your community is, and then after invest on your community and give back to your community. Give back. I think it's a two-way relationship. It's not the linear thing is dead. You can't, the linear economy, nobody wants of it anymore.
No. And speaking of communities, and you said it's not just in your region, since we're filming this in Canada, I wanted to ask you, from your perspective in the retail business, are there differences in Canadian retailing that are apparent versus maybe the Asian market, the EU, US?
Yeah, there's funny stuff. I've been in Canada for 7 years, so coming from Europe, and I would say the first thing that struck me when I arrived is the connection of Canadian with the weather. And I'm like, I've never seen this in my entire life. The connection to weather. People in Canada are plugged on the weather network. The weather, it's just
right.
It's part of their lifestyle. They're not complaining about the weather. It's just part of their lifestyle. I remember in the beginning, I'm like, wow, there's something here. And as I say, they're not complaining about it, but it's just part of. So when you do retail in Canada, at some point you need to pay attention to the weather. And it's funny, and technology actually enables you to leverage that thing. We in my past life, we run a promotion where we attach the level of the promotional discount to the temperature.
Oh, okay.
It was pretty cool, actually. Not creepy, really cool that time.
That's cool.
And we saw like sales increase that were unreal because you're talking to Canadian about something that they pay attention to, the weather. If you're actually able also through digital to promote this kind of product versus this kind of product, because in Calgary you can take 2 feet of snow. It's 13 degree one day, and the next day you take 2 feet of snow. Well, if you're in the old traditional world with your flyer and you're promoting T-shirt, well, good luck. You're not going to sell much. But if you're actually able to read and react and leverage whatever digital capability that exists now to promote winter boots, then the weather's going to help you. Growing your business. So I think that's one piece that I would say is the weather, the impact on the weather. The other thing that's interesting around Canadian, the way we shop. So some people will say, they're value shopper. Some other will say, rational shopper or smart shopper. So I would call it smart shopper. I think we take a lot. If you look at the consumer decision journey, we spend quite some time in the evaluation stage.
Definitely.
So we want to make sure that we're getting the best deal, the best product. We do a lot of social proofing. Social here is unreal. The social proofing piece of it. By the way, talking about retail, when are we going to bring social proofing in our store? I'll park that for later. But everybody shop by review. And if you look at traditional retail, how do you shop by review in store?
Try to look it up online.
That's the way you do it. So couldn't we make it easier? So let's going back to the smart. I would call it smart shopper, and they spend a lot of time to actually evaluate and benchmark the product or the solution they're trying to buy versus they crash test it and make sure. And when they buy, they know they got a good deal. So
they're very sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit less impulse and more I would say more smart. One piece that also struck me, so that's it's a little bit. It has probably something to do with the value shopper segment, but I mean, it's the presence of those massive loyalty program that you have here, which are. I haven't seen that many loyalty program of this kind in other countries, and that's actually pretty impressive. I mean, what's been built, there's an empire of data has been built here,
Sure.
and that are not, and they're like in many cases, in many countries, you got a loyalty program, but your loyalty program is actually tied up to your banner or to your business. But here, those are like, I would call them meta loyalty program. They're actually loyalty programs that are not specific to one vertical of one industry. They're just like,
Massive.
like massive, and I think that's another trend, and the last one, which I think for me is the online penetration rate versus what we used to see in whether it's in England or in south of the border, and the number I was giving at that time in 2012 were like it's more or less 50% of what's happening in Europe and what's happening south. And I'm like, wow. And my first question was why is there such a low appetite for e-commerce or online purchasing in Canada? So there's a few factors that can explain the lower number, but what I think is the most critical one is Canadians love shopping in person versus shopping online. And
I have heard that from one other person, a Canadian podcast host, said that it's just the malls are booming here. Yeah. They're not closing like they are down south.
No, and I think there's reason for this. That and we're not in the same situation from a number of mall, number of store expansion. That whole retail expansion has been going, but I think over and above it's that community play, and I think Canadians they like their in-person connection. They like the conversation. They like they need it. Actually, they need it. And there's other reason. Also like the country's big, so if so the shipping deadline are so there's other reason why, but I think the core, in my opinion, the main one is because Canadians just love shopping in person.
That's a great cultural insight, and I know you said there's geographic reasons as well, but just hearing firsthand your experience coming from Europe to Canada is really great.
Thanks so much.